meeting, but I believe this is a very safe space, so then my mistake could be seen as a new style. So thank you for accepting my mistake. I am Kwame Edwin Ochu, and I'm currently an assistant professor of African American and African Studies at the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies at UVA. It is a sad delight that I actually, introduce this event. And before I do so, I would like to first and foremost thank the Carter G. Woodson Institute for putting together this particular event under the auspices of Currents and Conversations. I would like to thank Professor Deborah McDowell, James Perla, Debbie Best, and Randy Swift for together swiftly putting together this wonderful event. Before I introduce the panelists today, I would also like to thank those who actually squeezed time out of their busy schedules to join us on Tuesday to see the screening. We were so elated to see you there. And I'm very happy to see that people are still showing up. We do have three illustrious guests today, and they are illustrious because of their work and their commitment to Black studies in particular and to Black people. And so I'm truly honored to be the one doing the introduction. And a lot of what we are going to do today is also personal to me, given my own connection intellectually and pedagogically to teaching about Black revolutions historically and in the contemporary moment. So today we have joining us Miss Lynn French. We do have AD Carson, our very own, and Professor Dr. Mary Phillips. I'll begin with Miss French. Miss French, you prefer Miss French or Madam French?
My name is French. You can call me whatever you want to call me. Just call me. I'm not.
Okay, so I would go with Madam French because of my Ghanaian upbringing again.
Well, my family lived in Cote d'Ivoire, so it's not totally alien to me.
Okay, very good then. Thank you for agreeing. Madame Lynn French was a member of the Black Panther Party from 1968 until 1973 in Chicago, as well as Oakland and Berkeley, California. In the party, she worked in a variety of areas, including newspaper circulation, labor, finance, breakfast programs, food and clothing giveaways. She walked the picket line during the Bill Boyd boycott in Oakland and was instrumental in starting child care centers in Berkeley and Chicago. After leaving the party, Madame French lived and worked in Cambridge, Massachusetts from 1973 until 1976, where she co-founded and co-administered the International Daycare Center. During those years, she was also employed as the Cambridge Somerville Community Representative for the Massachusetts Office for Children. Since graduating from law school in 1979, Madame French has worked in community development and housing policy in Washington, D.C., focusing on equitable alternatives to gentrification. She worked at the Council of the District of Columbia until 1987, drafting legislation and supporting the work of two council members in a variety of bills affecting rent control, the comprehensive plan, community parks, and most notably, drafting the Homestead Housing Preservation Act of 1987. From 2001 until her retirement from city government in 2006, Madame French served as senior policy advisor for homeless and special needs housing in the executive office of the mayor. She led the team that drafted Homeless No More, a strategy for ending homelessness in Washington, D.C. by 2014. During these years, Ms. French also coordinated implementation of sweeping improvements in shelter conditions and facilitated the development of supportive housing. Madame French now serves as executive director of Hope and a Home, a transitional housing program for low-income homeless families, supporting their efforts to break the cycle of poverty, as well as to achieve self-sufficiency and independence. Madam French is a District of Columbia native and completed her elementary and high school education in DC. She graduated with honors from Wellesley College and earned her Juris Doctorate at the University of Virginia Law School, where she was an Earl Warren Scholar. Welcome, Madam French. Now I'll proceed to introduce Professor Mary Phillips. Professor Phillips is a proud native of Detroit, Michigan. She is a scholar, activist, and public intellectual, and currently works as an assistant professor in the Department of Africana Studies at Lehman College, City University of New York. Her research areas include the modern Black freedom struggle, Black women's studies, and Black feminism. She was selected as a 2018-2019 award recipient for the American Association of University Women Postdoctoral Research Leave Fellowship. Currently, she's working on her book entitled Sister Love, Erica Huggins, Spiritual Activism, and the Black Panther Party, which is under contract with New York University Press. This project is the first and only biography of Huggins. In it, she documents the previously untold story of Huggins's early life and career in the Black Panther Party. The heart of her book excavates Huggins' day-to-day experience and acts of political dissent during confinement. Professor Phillips's articles have appeared in Souls, Women's Studies Quarterly, the Western Journal of Black Studies, Spectrum, a journal on Black men, and the Syllabus Journal. She has presented her work also at various conferences and panels, including the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial Educational Center. Welcome, Professor Phillips.
Thank you.
Now, our very own Professor Carson. Professor A.D. Carson is an award-winning performance artist and educator from Decatur, Illinois. His work focuses on race, literature, history, rhetorics, and performance. He received a PhD in rhetorics, communication, and information design at Clemson University. His album, I Used to Love to Dream, the first ever rap album peer-reviewed for publication with an academic press, was released with University of Michigan Press in 2020. This work extends from his doctoral dissertation entitled Owning My Masters, The Rhetorics of Rhymes and Revolutions, a rap album that is the primary feature of a digital archive at PhDidagreat.com, I beg your pardon. Owning My Masters was internationally heralded and was also recognized by Clemson's graduate student government as the 2017 Outstanding Dissertation. Without further ado, I'd like to really welcome these phenomenally illustrious guests. As it were, a lot of their work touches on the film we are going to be analyzing today, for which this panel was organized. And I would like to give you all a sense of how the program would unfold. I would begin with a few questions, and then the virtual podium would be open to those in the audience. So please just feel free to leave your questions as the panelists discuss some of the questions I posed to them. So I would like to really begin with the issue of representational accuracy, seeing as representation is really a big issue when it comes to Hollywood streaming Black stories. And I would like to actually ask members of the panelists, in particular, Madam French, who was actually quite embedded in the Black Panther Party, to offer us how did you react to Judas and the Black Messiah, please?
Well, excuse me, I have a bit of a frog in my voice today. I guess at age almost 75, I don't have an expectation that Hollywood's going to give me what I want to see. But the movie exceeded my expectations because from my perspective, the message of the movie, pure and simple, is that the United States government from its very top ordered the execution and assassination of Fred Hampton. And it's laid out pretty clearly there and shows to me, many of us are delighted as we observe Black Lives Matter and see them as an echo to our shout out in the 60s. And there's a message there about the extent to which the government will go to shut you up. So I guess I'm not giving you straightforward an answers you'd like. It's not a documentary. The only a few of the characters in the movie were real people. The rest were sort of, I don't know what the appropriate word for is, but they were made up people, to put it plainly. So I'm not so critical of that. I'm just amazed that Hollywood paid for that movie to be made, putting that message out there.
Mhm. 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 Thank you very much. Professor Phillips and Professor Carson.
So I'll jump in. So I have a little bit more of a critical analysis of the film. For me, the film really offers a masculinized orientation that really frames the FBI as having a personal vendetta with Fred Hampton. In my estimation, it lets the state off the hook and really fails to showcase the depth and varied degrees involved in the racist campaign of COINTELPRO. It tells the story, as we all know, from the lens of William O'Neill. What would it mean to really tell that story through the lens of Fred Hampton? And in a recent interview I read in the Los Angeles Times, the director, Shaka King, actually made a comment about that. And I'll quote this because I think it's really interesting. He said that, quote, "I thought it was a brilliant idea, mainly because it's the only way that you can get a movie about Fred Hampton or the Black Panther Party through the studio pipeline," end quote. So, his statement really speaks to the profound racism that is inherent in Hollywood. I also feel like the representation of women were very much marginalized. They centered really two women characters, of course, Deborah Johnson, and there was another woman that was centered in the film, but really the Panthers were very much touted as violent, right? So it perpetuated in many ways this violent characterization of the Panthers, and not really a lot of emphasis on the community survival work of the Black Panther Party. You didn't see them being involved or interacting with the community. That scene where, you kind of see the community coming back together and building the offices back up. The director or the screenwriter never built that up, right? Where we could see the Panthers engaging, doing the everyday work, doing the grassroots political organizing that they did, that led to that investment of the community wanting to repair the office and really restore the office. So, I asked, what would it mean to tell the story through, my fellow panelists, Lynn French or Yvonne King or Rhonda Ross or Joan Gray or many of the other women who were central to the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party?
Thank you very much. Professor Carson?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have, and thank you for having me here. But I think that I don't know if I have much to say about the representational accuracy of the film, but I do have, maybe a comment about just our expectations of what film is going to do for us. And, some of the things that have been said by the director and other things that have been written by folks about our understanding and engagement with genre and the expectations that we have for that whenever we are engaging with the piece of art. And I think that I appreciate reading and hearing what the director has to say about the film, because it seems that he's also very aware of the limitations of the of the form that he's that he's working in, and the particular piece of art that he's offered us. And my hope would be that this might lead us to engage in more conversations that will get at something that is more accurate, and that could lead us to more robust conversations, so that those folks that who don't know anything about the Black Panthers outside of what they were taught at their at their school, at their university, or in high school, will be able to hopefully dig a bit deeper and then get some more, which I believe is ultimately, I mean, in our practice that I love to actively engage in, but I'm also, I think, really interested in, well, I mean, I think that what the director said, something like the utility of art.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, what might we do with this rather than what does this not do for me? My question is, what might we do with this?
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me, well, hopefully I do bring my critique to it, but then like on top of my critique, I'm also wanting to, like sort of pull it into something else or bring it into something else. I think about this film next to the trial of the Chicago 7, which is, like fairly recent, and just look at the ways that, the Aaron Sorkin film takes liberties with history that this one kind of chooses not to. I'm not saying that there aren't liberties that are taken, some choices that are made, but like they're literally moving things around that didn't happen in the order they happened in order for, like plot devices in the Sorkin film. And we know a lot of people are going to watch a film and then think that the film is the way that everything happened. This, I don't know if it gets us closer. I think it gets us into the conversation about the kinds of liberties that folks take whenever they make films, and again, like what we might do with in that conversation.
Right. Thank you very much. I think to build on that, my following question would be, so do we get justice from films like this? I mean, should we expect Black people to derive or get justice? Are these assurances or reassurances, if you will, of justice, given the fact that it seems to me that a lot of these Black filmmakers are still navigating Hollywood, which is actually also particularly anti-Black? Right. And so then should we expect these media, these films? And I think, this year alone, we've seen a lot of Black films produced, right? I'm thinking about Regina King's film, and I'm just thinking about the ways in which Black bodies or representing Black bodies, right, have become suddenly palatable. And I think I read in an interview with Shaka Khan, in which he uses the term of the obsession of Black excellence industrial complex. So should we expect for these media, for these films to bring us the justice we need? Can they do that? And Adi, I think you were saying they draw us closer, but do they do that? Would they do that?
Yeah, no, and please, I'm not saying that this film is doing any, no, I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I don't believe that number one, I don't expect it. And then number two, I don't believe that that's what's being done. Mm-hmm. And so I don't believe that Hollywood's obsession or interest in Black folks has anything to do with getting Black folk justice. That ain't, I mean, like these are two totally different things. Mm-hmm. And if, yeah, like if I'm not sitting down in front of my television or, when folks can go to theater, sitting down in a theater, thinking that this film is going to deliver the thing that I needed to feel all right about the history of this the United States and the Black Panthers. Right. Mm-hmm. That's not even, there's nowhere. I mean, I will, echo the earlier comment. The bar for me was really low, mm-hmm. and my expectations were exceeded. But that's not me saying that this film did it. Right. Because I don't think that I would say that. But also, I'm not looking for that to be done by Hollywood. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could I jump in there? Yeah. I mean, because I kind of don't agree with Dr. Phillips, some of the things Dr. Phillips said. First place, I don't have an expectation that I will find my freedom or my self-determination from something that Hollywood produces. That's just not even on the radar screen for me. And I don't believe, even if you walk past that, I don't believe that, and I've read there've been, Lord knows there've been a million interviews with Shaka King. I don't believe that Shaka King even represents that this movie was made to tell people what the Black Panther Party was and to give the whole history. It really was very narrowly focused on the fact that J. Edgar Hoover, and probably the president, ordered the execution of Fred Hampton. And you can call that sexist, racist, whatever it is. I think they were racist. I think they were sexist. I don't think there have to be more women sitting at the FBI to make that point. That's what happened. And that's the stark reality to me. a warning that people need to understand that, I'm not saying don't step out there. I think people should be committed to finding their freedom, but if you come to play, you come to play. And, now there could have been more people, more women in the movie. There are little things that we saw, like I talked to one person about, well, that's not who drove to the prison to pick up Fred. So-and-so went. But it's like none of that is relevant to the point that was being made in the film, in my opinion. What was important was, and I also saw, now maybe it didn't show enough for your taste about what we did, but I saw Fred serving free breakfast to the children. I saw them going out and walking up and down the streets, recruiting people, talking to people. So I didn't see that as not showing that we had a connection to the masses, as we used to say. There's certainly more things you could have told. For example, in Chicago, we even got the donation of a Greyhound bus on which we superimposed a Black Panther, but that's not the story that was being told here. So I'm not as offended, and maybe I'm just an old fogey. So I don't see that, but I have to be honest about that. I also didn't know that I was being invited to a panel on film critique, because I'm not someone who feels qualified to critique films.
So thank you for that, Professor Phillips. Do you want to go on?
Yeah. And I certainly do not have an expectation that Hollywood is going to be, the portal in which Black folks get their freedom. Lord knows I don't believe that. But I do think at the same time, we don't often see films that interrogate Black power, particularly the Black Panther Party. And I think we're also starved for these images, with that, right? And films have a powerful medium, right? For me, there is a social responsibility that I think filmmakers should hold in telling these very historical narratives. I think even if we look at Fred Hampton, there was so much about Fred Hampton that was left out of the narrative around his backstory, and that he was a leader in the NAACP before he became involved in the Black Panther Party, or more context around the racism of Mayor Daley, or racial segregation. I could go on and on. I'm just offering, I guess what I'm offering is, and as somebody who studies the Black Panther Party, I had to do, when my niece and nephew saw the film, I had to do, of course, they believe everything at face value with what they see, and so I had to do a lot of work and really educating them on, for example, when we talk about the Rainbow Coalition, they were curious, well, who were the Young Lords? Who were the Young Patriots? How did they come together? What was the work they were doing that brought them together? I had to do a little bit of that work with just the young folks in my family.
Well, I hope you will refer them to The Murder of Fred Hampton and American Revolution 2, which were made several decades ago.
Absolutely.
That lay out both of those stories.
Absolutely.
And I think all of us in the audience should see that too. It's not only for the nephews and the nieces of Professor Phillips, but to us all. And so, Professor French, since you brought Madam French, I beg your pardon. Since you touched on that, you are listed in the credits of the film, and the anthropologist in me hankers really to hear what your suggestions and advice to the filmmaker was.
I didn't really give them advice. I'm happy to just full disclosure, and well, I'll leave the other thing alone. I know one of the people that Dr. Phillips cited as someone who wants to write the story herself, and I hope that you'll take the message back to her that everybody's waiting for her to write it. It's been over 50 years. I was approached by Paul Coates, who was an esteemed member of the Black Panther Party, and someone who I consider, a brother by another mother, and his son, Ta-Nehisi Coates, is very close to Ryan Coogler. And what Paul called me to say was that Ryan Coogler felt that he had made so much money off of the other the Black Panther movie that made billions, that he felt that he wanted to make one on something real in the Black Panther Party. And that in looking through it, the leader within the party to whom he was most drawn was Fred Hampton. And people in Chicago, many people in Chicago are notoriously reluctant to talk to anybody who comes to ask questions about that, people, former chapter members, because there's maybe one or two people who want to write the story themselves and haven't. My personal opinion is that I want every young person today, everybody's niece and nephew and child, to know who Fred Hampton was. So I was willing to work with them. I had no expectation that they would make the movie that I would have made if I were a filmmaker and had access to Warner Brothers. But I felt that if they were going to make it, I would. So my role in it was introducing them to people. And that's how they got entree to people in Chicago. And most people, there was only a couple people who held back. Most people were very happy to talk to them and to lay out information. And so that's the role. And I think in one of, people have sent me so many articles about Shaka King that I have them coming out the ears, but I think one of them, it might be in GQ, he states that history. But I had no input into the plot, into those lines in the movie or anything. And then maybe a couple times, one thing that sticks out to me is one time he did call me and he said, "Can you just tell me the name of a restaurant where you all used to hang out?" And he caught me like in the evening. I'm sitting here, reading my paper or whatever. And I said, "Shaka, in 1968 and 69, there weren't any restaurants on the west side of Chicago. Dr. King was assassinated in April 1968. You're talking about something that happened within the year following. The whole community was burned out. People were broke. We weren't sitting around going to restaurants. We were out there doing community organizing." And I think that's the biggest input I gave to him. That, like, we were not cheesing anywhere. We were, we were out there working. And I think other than that, I don't know that I had any conversation with him about what someone might have said or not said or anything.
Thank you.
I guess he did ask me if I knew William O'Neill, and I gave him a very honest opinion of William O'Neill.
Do you want to share that
probably
with us?
included language I shouldn't use here.
Do you want to share that with us?
Well, I mean, I can summarize it. I just, he was a low-life dog. He was from the same place that Fred was from and played along, and any notion that he had any other opinion of what he was doing. I read in when Eyes on the Prize came out, you see only a piece of the interview he did for Eyes on the Prize in the movie, but there's a volume. I have it here on my shelf. I can dig it out. There's a volume that gives all the text to all the interviews. And if you read, there's a pretty lengthy interview that they did with him. And O'Neill was a pathological liar. And it's clear from the interview that he just had no sense of conscience or anything about what he had done. There's just no room for sympathy. And in my personal opinion is that, he once he was uncovered in the survivors trial, there was a lawsuit where the survivors who were in that apartment that night sued the government, and they won what was then a record recovery. And in the course of that lawsuit, the lawyers uncovered, they stumbled on the existence of COINTELPRO. While the trial was going on, people broke into that famous break-in in Media, Pennsylvania, where they found the documents that said COINTELPRO existed. So the lawyers said, wow, if they did that, I wonder what they have on Fred and on us. And they even, they were found in contempt of court and had to appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court to force the government to release that information. And in the course of that information, O'Neill was unmasked. And at that point, he was put into witness protection. And he was gone for a number of years. And I guess he just, I don't know how to explain this in shorthand without taking up too much time. But if you knew him, you'd know that he probably wasn't somebody who was going to really thrive in the witness protection program. Just like when you see gangster movies and they talk about the gangsters going to witness protection, they get upset because they can't still go out and be gangsters and maintain the witness protection. So he gave that up and came back to Chicago. And I surmise, I don't know because I didn't have a conversation with him about it, but I surmise that he thought the people had long since forgotten about that and that he could just skate on it. And Fred Hampton is a hometown hero in Chicago. I think every city has hometown heroes of people who are from there, who everybody knows. And he very quickly saw that people knew who he was, weren't going to forget who he was. And as you saw from the movie, as soon as that was aired, he went out and killed himself. I mean, so that's my opinion of William O'Neill. And I don't think that the movie, again, I don't want to turn this into a debate with Dr. Phillips because I have a world of respect for her and her scholarship. But I don't personally feel that he was glorified in that movie. I think it showed a pretty pathetic existence. And in that extensive interview with him, he even talks about how the FBI agent was his father figure, his role model. It's like, it was pretty pathetic. A lot of self-hatred there.
Thank you very much. I think, Professor Phillips, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I definitely agree with that pathetic representation. I mean, I think it was a lot of care that was embedded in William O'Neill's representation. I mean, we saw his anxiety, we saw his frustrations, we saw that he was a pawn for the FBI. We saw his crazed behavior. I think my critique just lies in, I don't think that same kind of care was given to the history, or I should say the representation of the Black Panther Party as a whole at large, and Fred Hampton. We got more.
So you didn't think that the movie showed Fred as an admirable person?
I mean, I feel like the power that he had in the community could have been amplified a bit stronger than it was.
Okay. To each her own. Let me tell you one little more tidbit without monopolizing this too much. I guess about 2 years ago, the Chicago Public Library, because it's coming up on the 50th anniversary of Fred's assassination, and the Chicago Public Library mounted a major exhibit on Fred Hampton and the Illinois chapter that was a year-long exhibit. And I was on one of the panels, the panel that was on women who were in the party. And my daughter flew with me out to Chicago, and we were staying with a couple, both of whom were in the party as well. And the morning before the panel, Chicago, one of the great things about Chicago is there are a lot of neighborhood soul food restaurants that serve food that make you want to slap your mama. I mean, it's so good. So we had gone to a place for breakfast, and the four of us are sitting at a table, and there's a table not far from us where there's a person who was maybe in his 40s, and he had 3 younger children with him, and I was facing them, and I heard him utter the name Fred Hampton, and my ears perked up. And so I was trying to not be obvious, but to hear what he was saying. And he caught on that I was listening to him. So he said very loudly, well, there are a whole lot more things I could tell you if when we have more privacy. So my daughter got up and went to the table and said, I know you saw that my mother was watching you. I just want you to know that those 3 people at that table over there were all in the Black Panther Party with Fred Hampton. And they were like, ah, I mean, Fred is just loved in Chicago, just adored, you know. Everybody knows what he died for. And when they show a bit in that movie of how after the assassination, the police were too stupid to tape up and close off the apartment. So we had people from our education cadre who actually were giving tour guides to people. We opened up the apartment to everyone. We had immediately hired ballistics experts. So there were straws lined up so that you could see the trajectory of every bullet hole in the apartment going towards Fred's bedroom. And we had hired our own pathologist. So people were just coming through, and it wasn't just Black people coming through, and it wasn't just young people. It was, there were like 3 million people in Chicago at that point, and there was a representation of everybody who lived in Chicago. Just looking firsthand at that, you know, that it was just a lynching. It was just, you know, it was a lynching. So, okay, enough. Is it? Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I think Professor McDowell has a question. And so the audience, I think if the audience or members in the audience have questions, now is the time to ask. So Professor McDowell?
Oh, hold on. Let me see where I can find myself so I can unmute myself. Where am I?
You're there.
But I'm muted and I can't. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I just had a couple of questions. Of course, one is Lynn. Although you have shared this with me, I thought it might be useful for the audience for you to share how you became involved in the Panther Party, particularly given your background. So if you first could say something about your background here in Barboursville, Virginia, and then how a nice upper middle class woman becomes involved in the Panther Party. And then I have a follow-up, if I may.
Okay.
But I want to be sure the audience has time.
Okay. I was trying not to talk so much about myself. So actually, I grew up in Washington, D.C., but
your family's from Barboursville.
My mother's father's family was enslaved in Barboursville, Virginia. They were enslaved by Governor Barber of Virginia, and we still have a home there. I think my baby sister's on this call somewhere too, if she wants to wave out. That's where my family, I sort of lost myself, I apologize. So we grew up in and out of Barboursville, and we still, that's, you know, our family home. And we've watched there were pretty deplorable conditions when I was a kid. I was born in 1946. So, you know, I have recollections of pre-Brown, pretty stiff, you know, everything. My father was a surgeon, and he was very much rooted in public service. And whenever we'd go down for the weekend, he would just quietly open the front door to the house, and people who needed healthcare could come and line up, and he'd give it to them, and he'd bring them samples, because people were not getting appropriate healthcare there. People were living in really horrible conditions in Orange County. And maybe it's a little better now, but it still is Trump country. So I grew up, you know, I came of age at a time when many of us were asking, why not? You know, why not do something? Why do we need to accept these conditions? Washington, D.C. was a segregated city. And when I graduated from high school in '63, the expectations were like, okay, you can go to college and marry a nice guy who'll give you a good life, or you could become a school teacher, or you can clean someone's house. And nobody talked about any more even futures for, I mean, my parents did, but in general in society. And so when I was in high school, I used to hang out with people from NAG, the Nonviolent Action Group, which was a forerunner of SNCC, and people were doing demonstrations on Route 40. And then when I graduated from high school, I decided I didn't really want to go to college. And in 1963, that was like, my parents were mortified. And so I just didn't mail away any applications for college. And they ended up packing me off to a college in Ohio, Western College for Women. And I spent that year going on demonstrations and really not doing much else. And at the end of the year, I wrote home and I said, well, you might not have heard of this, but SNCC is going to have a Mississippi Freedom Summer this summer, and people are training here at this college. So I'm not coming home. I'm going to Mississippi. And I came out of, this is just a little forerunner to give you a feel for, the middle classness of my family. I came out of my last exam, and my mother and my grandmother were in my dorm room frantically packing all my belongings. They had rented a U-Haul and attached it to the car. They were throwing things in, and I'll never forget my mother saying, somebody's child's going to be killed this summer and it won't be mine. And that stands out in memory for me because it's the last time that I lacked the agency to make my own decisions. I just said, okay, mama, and I went home. But from then on, it was like I was going to find my way. And so I went to Chicago to finish, I wasn't going back to Oxford, Ohio. And by that time, I landed in Chicago in 1966, around the time that Stokely Carmichael articulated Black Power. And, everybody I knew we were all just interested in Black Power. I was involved in an organization with Diane Nash, who had been a SNCC member. We formed an organization called Women's Committee for the Protection and Care of Our Children. We had a house in the Lake Park community where we were doing programming for children, but mostly everybody was trying to figure out, how are we going to articulate this Black Power? What are we going to do? And suddenly on the horizon, I discovered Ramparts magazine. I don't know if any of you know what Ramparts magazine was, but Eldridge Cleaver was an editor. And all of a sudden there's this display of the Black Panther Party through the eyes of Eldridge Cleaver. And meanwhile, on the front page of the New York Times was an article saying that these Black Panthers had gone to Sacramento with shotguns to protest at the State House while they were voting on gun control. And, I'm like, these are the people I want to know more about. And so we formed a Black student union. And at that time, most schools didn't have Black student unions. And we had a conference right after Dr. King was assassinated in '68. And we invited people from the other colleges and junior colleges around Chicago. And we had workshops, and we said, we need a speaker. And one of our classmates named Bill Hampton said, I have a brother who's a real good speaker. So sight unseen, we asked Fred Hampton to come be our speaker. Right around that same time, Bobby Rush and Bob Brown founded the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. And Fred Hampton was their first recruit because he was such a good speaker. So they didn't yet have an office. They weren't, they were just at that formative stage. So when they came, that's how I met them. And for me, it was like, as they say, that's all she wrote. And with the 10-point program, there was a 10-point program that I invite everyone to familiarize themselves with, that every point in that program is something we still strive for. But the one that hit me the most strongly was the first point was, we want freedom. We want the power to determine our own destiny. And that's what spoke to me. And that's how I came to join, Debbie.
Yes, well, you told me this story and it's very compelling. If I could just have one follow-up, and it is to Professor Phillips, to Mary. And kind of coming off of a point you just made, Lynn, about women, and your connection to Diane Nash and other women who are very active in progressive social movements. So Mary, thinking about your work on Erica Huggins, imagine that you had a say in Erica Huggins's representation? It wouldn't be accurate. I mean, how could to educate our audience about Erica Huggins and how what you know about her might have informed the movie?
Yeah. So the New Haven trial actually came up in the movie. They mentioned the FBI informant George Sams. And my work in particular, I'm writing a biography of Erica Huggins, but she was charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder of Black Panther Party member Alex Rackley. 18 months before that, she had, as most people know this story, she had lost her husband as well as her comrade Bunchy Carter on the campus of UCLA. That was also part of an FBI plot. And part of my work really looks at what I call spiritual practices, and these are self-affirming communal acts of care that are intricately tied to the mind, body, and soul that we see in the Panther praxis, as well as the work that we see in women who were incarcerated as part of their survival strategies. And one of those is Erica Huggins. And so, my work looks at, not just the kind of women-centered women-centered work that she did with other incarcerated women who were at Niantic at the time that she was, but also meditation and yoga and all of this kind, letter writing, all of this kind of advocacy that she did to fight for the humanity of herself and also the women that were incarcerated with her. So she lived bigger than herself, as is the case of the Black Panther Party members as a whole. And so, what I would add, and I kind of already talked about that a little bit with the treatment of women. If we thought about, Fred Hampton's wife, Deborah Johnson, for example, she was very involved in the fundraising efforts. Of course, she served breakfast for children, at the breakfast program. But there would be more accounting of women's the contributions that women had in that story. They aren't silent, bystanders, if you will. They were critical and central to the operations of the Black Panther Party. So how do we tell this story with a fuller accounting of everyone? You can't, as Kathleen Cleaver say, we can't have the revolution with half the population, you know what I mean? And that's not as representative of what happened in history. So how do we do this where we have a more inclusive story? So for one, the representation of women would be much more filler. Most people just know Deborah Johnson as tied to Fred Hampton. We really don't know, and the film doesn't give us an accounting of what she did on her own accord, and that's the case with a lot of women in the Black Panther Party. When we think about how women are marginalized, I teach a course on the Black Panther Party. And on the first day, and it's on women and gender in the Black Panther Party, I asked my students, how many women do you know in the Black Panther Party? And they could barely make out three women members of the Black Panther Party. But they know Huey P. Newton's story. They know Bobby Seale, they know Fred Hampton, all of these other figures. So, what does it mean to have more of an inclusive story? So that's one of the things that I would offer to retreat.
Thank you.
Debbie, don't you have a connection to John Huggins and Bunchy Carter?
Me?
Weren't you a student at UCLA when the assassination happened?
Oh, no.
I always thought you were.
Oh, no, I did not go.
It was just Jean Tungara who was there.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I went to Tuskegee.
Okay.
And I believe it was Jeannie.
Yeah, Jean told me.
It was Jeannie Tungara.
She was there. Exactly. She was there in the student center.
Yes.
I just might add, I guess Deborah now calls herself Aqua Jerry, but she was, if anybody had input on the script, it was Deborah and Little Fred. They were the two who were the consultants on the script. Nobody else had any input on it. So that rests solely with them. But the movie does refer, in two ways to Erica, who's from, we have the same hometown and same age, because of her husband, John Huggins, was assassinated at UCLA by Ron Karenga's organization. And then they introduced the whole thing there and in the Chicago 7 thing where they're whisking Bobby off. It's a trumped up charge accusing Erica and Bobby of murder. And it's that guy you see in the movie, George Sams, who they have J. Edgar Hoover in the movie saying openly, oh, he works for us. We have him go into every chapter, and then we can go in and raid when he leaves. And that's exactly what he did to them.
Are there any questions from the audience, please, at this point? Or any questions from the panelists to the panelists?
Question.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful panel. My question is for Professor Phillips. I'm very intrigued in these challenges narratively of how we get a fuller picture of what's going on. And do you have any scholarship or recent work that you'd suggest that we look at? I mean, obviously your work, but what's the vanguard here in terms of a more inclusive story?
Yeah, so, scholars that are doing this work, scholars that come to mind, Tracy Matthews, Robin Spencer's book, The Revolution Has Come, Angela LeBlanc Ernest's work, Ashley Farmer's work really looks at, the experiences of women across the Black Power movement. You have Linda Loomsman's, article that looks at the relationship of, or I should say the history of the newspaper in the context of frames of womanhood. So I could, if you email me, I could send you a list. It's a growing body of literature that is really, developing, that's looking at, women's activism, not just in the Black Power movement, but the Black Panther Party.
I'll certainly email you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, George. So I have a quick question. I'm interested in whether movement like the Black Panther movement is in any way connected to contemporary movements, right? Because it seems to me from the film that there seemed to be, or at least in the history of the Black Panther, like that there were factions, right? So I'm particularly interested in whether like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, is still articulated with or connected, if you will, to the Black Panther Party, or is there a departure? And if so, does the film actually then emerge as a useful resource, right, for how to think about movement work in the contemporary moment?
Are you asking me that?
It's for the panelists, so just
you too. That movie takes place before, I assume you're referring to the so-called split that happened in the Black Panther Party. Yes. And that happened later.
Okay.
I mean, I don't consider it a split because the other faction actually left the party to form the Black Liberation Army. Mm-hmm. But I guess I don't have a sensible answer to your question. Somebody else might.
Well, I think there's definitely a connection. I see, Black Lives Matter or contemporary movements. I mean, there's quite a few I can think of that are doing work on the ground, that are out in the community, these organizations are youth driven, and they are certainly looking to the Black Panther Party, and they're studying the theories and the experiences of, what it meant to, really push and drive, an organization, that was about social change. And so I definitely see, many contemporary organizations working in the spirit of the Black Panther Party. I don't see the movie as where to go to get that, And so, yeah.
Okay.
But didn't you, I must have misunderstood your question, because I thought you were saying you were referring to the split in the party and asking what message that had for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, so that's true. And I asked that in the spirit of the fact that, you know, there is a split in the Black Lives Matter movement right now. Right.
Yeah.
So then are we reproduce, like, is it like the changing same, if you will? Like how can we do movement work and still be willing to contend with these internal factions, right? Because they are always going to be there. But how can we not let these factions actually demobilize or sterilize movement work? Is really what I'm trying to get at.
I think that what should probably, I mean, if we maybe inverted the question just a bit, I think that it would maybe reveal that, well, like the United States government hasn't stopped being the United States government.
Yes.
And therefore, when we think about like a movement, or we think about like these movements that we have here, plural, and then we think about the movement of the United States government and how consistent that has been, and the success of it probably has a whole lot to do with this factionalism that it like seems to be facing. And I think that when we talk about it, we talk about it as individuals who are trying to organize, who have split up because, I don't know, personalities, egos, etc. But like we've got all of this documentary evidence that this was a persistent, consistent effort by the United States to sow this kind of discord. And then when we articulate the histories, we talk about these factions as if they were things that were not instigated by the force that they've been working against. And so then we end up talking about these groups rather than talking about the force that they were working against. And when we leave that, it feels like we're telling half the story. And if we're telling half the story, then like we also have these things that we might call generations, like we would call these like these groups that have existed from, say, the beginning of the FBI all the way up until now. And the FBI has been like the master gang that has been manipulating it. And then we tell the stories according to the FBI's narrative, even while we're calling the FBI out. Right. And so I think that we just have to do better accounting of the ways that we tell our histories, so that when we tell the story, we know that this isn't one faction versus another faction of the people. It's the government versus the people, and like invested in this control in this way that they might be able to, you know, like to deflate that power.
Thank you. And please feel free to type your questions in the chat if you have any. Thank you. And so I think I feel like I'm the one doing all the questions. Anyone has something to say? Because I would ask questions through. So I'm also a scholar of desire, and I just really am interested in the ways in which, you know, the film represented desire, especially between Fred Hampton and Deborah Johnson, right? I think that was quite captured, because very often activists, organizers, and revolutionaries are somehow deprived in their representations of desire. So would you agree that, you know, the film does some kind of, the film has fidelity, if you will, when it comes to representing, you know, Black revolutionaries in love or expressing desire?
Well, I'll jump in. I was going to, you know, see who would. I mean, you know, I think that's certainly there. I mean, you see them fall in love, you know what I mean? You really see the development of, you know, they have trying to build a family and what have you. I mean, the desire is there, but I think that's part of the appeal in that comes in a lot of these films, right? You got to have a love interest and all that. I mean, yes, that is true, but I mean, the desire is there. I did find it interesting though, and I don't know what accounted for this. It may be that, you know, and Jerry did not want to use one of her own poems, but I had read that the actor used one of her own poems. Instead, this wasn't an opportunity where we got to hear, you know, from, you know, in Jerry and her poetry, you know, and so I found that interesting, that choice, but you know.
But it was her choice, right?
I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kwame, do you see the question?
Yeah, I
from-
see the question by Michael Mason. Thank you, Michael. So the question is, how do we make sense of the necessity of the Judas and Messiah archetypes for telling these important and maybe otherwise unpalatable Black stories?
Good question.
You know, well, what's interesting about this is, I mean, this is something that you know, immediately after the film, I was talking with a friend about this, that it seems to be kind of an inaccurate analog. You know, like that there are like that somehow William O'Neill's association with the organization was something, and then it turned into something else. And I don't believe that that's like represented in the film. And it seems that that's also not accurate. And so, I mean, that's just kind of like speaking to how like Judas and the Black Messiah kind of works out. But I also understand that folks are trying to play on words and be clever. And so like sometimes that works and other times it doesn't. And then other times it seems like it works and then it falls apart under scrutiny.
Well, Black Messiah came from J. Edgar Hoover. You know that. I mean, that in Freedom of Information, everybody got those documents that J. Edgar Hoover was concerned about leadership that could pull together anti-war, Black power, just every, you know, all the different aspects of the people who were ascribing to the Rainbow Coalition and to the party. And that was the threat that he saw in Fred. That was why they were concerned that Fred was unifying all these people, and they didn't want to. So I think if anything was so that made O'Neill the Judas, which he was.
Yeah, I think
I don't think that the writer created that thing that really came from J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, I only meant to say the way that they're trying to play with the biblical metaphor and the FBI metaphor
at the
same time. And also, I mean, I think maybe the question is about the vehicle, like the story, the way that the story is being told, and how we need a story that's told from the standpoint of this traitor inside of you know, sort of like this Trojan horse story, and why we are obsessed with the Trojan horse story being told over and over. And that's an entirely different thing. And I think that we see that represented in lots of films. Again, like you can go to Shaka King, who also talks about this being a way that audiences really understand. I think that audiences want a certain kind of drama. They want a certain kind of romance. They want a certain kind of love. They want a certain kind of violence. And they get all of those things in this film. And those folks who want this historical fidelity are the folks who are probably most perturbed by that, because you see these as the tropes that Hollywood needs in order to tell whatever story they're going to tell. And the story that we love, or the things close to our heart, is sacrificed for that. And so then we're, you know, like when we're talking about the film, we're talking about the film that we would have loved to see rather than the film that we did see.
And I think I asked Shaka King point blank, why, you know, before I knew what the end product, I knew that there was going to be stuff about O'Neill. And I was like, why do you have to have O'Neill in this? And he said, we wouldn't be able to get Hollywood to buy into the movie without that push and pull that, you know, and he talks about it being like The Departed and whatever other films that are like that. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and that says a lot about the industry.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That's what it is.
And you know what, you know, Hollywood thinks would sell, you know, and it's racist. It's profoundly problematic.
So what's the answer?
The answer is to, you know, keep pushing to try to tell more nuanced stories, more stories that, you know, work to, you know, humanize Black and brown folks, and that does not feed a racist machine. You know what I mean? To keep pushing to try to change Hollywood, to try to make, I mean, we're in a very different moment where, you know, you could pick up your phone and you can make movies. I mean, we can think creatively, we can be independent. It's all different kinds of ways. And I know there's other filmmakers that are cutting edge that are also thinking about how do we, make movies that, are doing the work that promotes, social change and really push us away from this kind of limited representation of Blackness on the screen.
Yeah, and I hope that they get to make a film, and I hope that I get to go see it. But I also am old enough to remember, like, when that summer about Mississippi Freedom Summer was told. It was called Mississippi's Burning, and it was a movie about a white FBI agent who was sent down there. So to me, this is progress in the racism. I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but to me, I'm amazed that this much got out of Hollywood, because at least it wasn't about the white person who met Fred Hampton and saw these things. It's actually about Fred Hampton. And, so, I got to stop debating you. I really respect you. I don't want it to sound like I don't.
We're in dialogue. It's totally okay.
Yes, right.
This is very interesting. I think James Perla has a question. James, then I can go to Kimberly Fields' question.
Sure. Thanks so much for this wonderful discussion. And I'll preface this by saying I'm not trying to salvage Hollywood. I'm very much here and agreeing with everything that's been said. But one of the things that I was thinking about in watching the film and getting to watch it twice because of the screening the other day, is the thought that, is this film about organizing versus direct action, and so we get a lot of Hollywood representations of marches and the sort of cinematic conflict of people on a street getting shot by fire hoses, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that struck me was that a lot of the action, quote unquote, takes place in these private settings. So like you're in people's houses, you're in gymnasia, you're in a church, and there's not much, there are those infiltrators there that, Fred Hampton jokes about, but in some ways it seems like that's maybe some of the progress, with, using that word advisedly, in the representation, being that, it's not about being at a pulpit with thousands and throngs of people around, that it seems like the depiction is more about the kind of organizing versus direct action. So that's more of a comment, but if someone can pull a response out of there, or if that's a fair assessment, then that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be honest. I saw the community programming of the Black Panther Party making cameo appearances. The community survival programs were the bread and butter of the Black Panther Party. That's the heart work of the Black Panther Party. And, I don't know how clearly they did it, but I find it problematic that they told this story and did not showcase that work, in a more pronounced way. And so, and when you talk about the private fear, it made me think about how, like, that's the realities of being Black in America, unfortunately. It's like, we're always policed, we're always surveilled, we're always criminalized, we're always, demonized, and so I don't necessarily see that as progress. But, as kind of what it is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I know it does.
Professor Carson, there's a question directed to you in particular, which says, I recently read an article that expressed a view that suggests featuring Jay-Z, Polo G, Push Ice-T exploits Hampton's image to, quote, peddle liberation light billboard hits. What artists would you have recommended for the soundtrack? What are your thoughts on the film's score and soundtrack?
Okay, I'll start with the last question first. I think that the score of the film is nicely done. I think that, sort of the way that And it's just like in this very interesting use of, I don't know, like signifying jazz, like in these like tense moments, you know, that I kind of appreciate. And it also feels, you know, in certain ways that, you know, I believe that there are, or at least like in a hip hop practice that I ascribe to, you know, like privileges, the kind of geospecificity. Like when we hear you, we hear who you come from, or we hear where you come from. And I think that, you know, in a lot of like Ryan Coogler's films, you actually get that when you see the film. So like if you're watching Fruitvale Station, I imagine that folks who live there feel like the place that they come from is represented in that film. I don't really feel that in this film about Chicago. And I think that there are these things that like, again, like that happens in, say, for instance, the way that in Black Panther, like we hear like this deep bass whenever they're underground. Like we hear, like there's like a power in the score of the film that's actually like using hip hop to like coincide with like what vibranium might do. I think that there's like this subtle thing that's happening in this film with jazz, like to do that, or like these sort of like sort of sonic signifying toward jazz. Now, I mean, like that's like the film score, dope, cool. That soundtrack, however, nah. Yeah, and so like, you know, like Jay-Z is slick, you know, and I think that he's a good rapper. Being a good rapper is not synonymous with, I want to be careful. I'll say it this way because I don't want to. It is exploitative, I think, to use a Jay-Z and Nipsey Hussle song for this soundtrack, and then for Jay-Z to sort of to use the line once again about his birth on the day that Fred Hampton died, making this. I mean, it's almost like you sit two things right by each other, and then because they're by each other, you say they're the same. I don't know, like that. Those are incidents that happen on the same day that have very little to do with each other, except that they happen on the same day. Mm-hmm. And so Jay-Z as an artist is the exact opposite of what Fred Hampton stood for. Like you can't have a film that starts with, we're going to fight, we're going to fight capitalism, not with Black capitalism, but with socialism, and then have like Jay-Z is the avatar of Black capitalism in America, in the world over. Like this guy just jumped in and out of bed with, Jack from Twitter today. And then like we turn around and then it's like, yeah, but like, since I'm Jay-Z, I can do this. Or because I'm Beyonce's husband, I can do this. And Beyonce is not, Beyonce is also guilty of this as well. So I'm sorry, like those of you, like who are fans, but I think that there's this, like with that talk about the Black excellence, Black
industrial complex, like we get that where we get like sort of, we get Kendrick Lamar's, like performance of, like the Chain Gang at the Grammys, and we get Beyonce with the Black Beret at the Super Bowl, and all of this sort of corporate sponsored Blackness. I think that this soundtrack is just another product of that. And I think that like we listen to it. I mean, and so I say all of that, and what I will say that I appreciate about the soundtrack is that Bump J is on it. I read and understand why No Name refused, but if I were going to add someone, it might be her. I think that there are just other artists today who are better like representations. And so like, if I were to say, I wouldn't say like, let's get Kendrick Lamar, but I would say, let's get D Smoke if we were going to go and do this. But like, why are there not like more, like, why is there not more Chicago on this soundtrack? Mm-hmm. And I mean, not just like contemporary Chicago, like this is the reason that I appreciate Bump J on the soundtrack, honestly. And so, yeah. Thank you. There's a question that says, what do you all think about the importance of political education, especially for young Black radicals? Can a film from Hollywood be considered political education? How do Black organizers properly remember Anna and tell the story of the Black Panthers?
I don't even see that question.
So can Hollywood actually offer us political education? Can we free ourselves through Hollywood representations?
No, I don't think so. And I think we all agree on that. No. But Ryan Coogler's Fruitvale Station, AD, I think you mentioned Ryan Coogler's Fruitvale Station. And that is one film that I showed in my classes because you know, that film is nuanced and it humanizes Oscar Grant. I mean, you know, it kind of, it does the work that I think filmmakers should do. And Ryan Coogler talked about he talked about, you know, I feel like part of my role as a filmmaker is about social responsibility, you know, and so that's a good example. I'm not saying, I don't think films free us, but I do think there are some films out there that, you know, do the work better than others.
Well, it's interesting because when they approached me, that was his selling point. He said to me, because I said, I'm reluctant that someone's going to, you know, just exploit the story. And he said, well, did you see Fruitvale Station? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I grew up in Oakland. I saw the Panthers as a kid, and that's how I do my work. So that was you know, it's interesting that you bring that up.
Thank you.
In terms of the music, it's funny. I'm just sitting here laughing at myself because, I mean, is Jay-Z in the soundtrack?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my ignorance. I'm from a different generation with the music. If I were doing it, the music would have been Motown or rhythm and blues. It would have been the music we were singing back then. And when we were in the party, all those popular hit songs, which were, you know, made by companies that were stepping out there in terms of Black people controlling their own music. And we would kind of change the words around, you know, like Marvin Gaye had a thing, too busy thinking about my baby, ain't got time for nothing else. We used to sing, too busy thinking about the people, ain't got time for nothing else. We used to change all the, so I was kind of hoping that I was going to hear some of that music, but yeah.
And it made me think, when, you know, hearing your comment, it made me think about the band that was in the Black, you know, the Lumpin', that was, the Black Panther Party had a band, you know, I mean.
Yeah, that was much later, but yeah.
You know, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, AD.
No, yeah, I was just going to say that this, I think that this is also like part of why, you know, like the question about like, it's it's a hilarious question, like, is Hollywood the way to get free? And no, but like there's a political education that you can get from Hollywood, but it's not going to be like this liberatory thing. Like we will learn a whole lot about America, you know, and who we are and what we enjoy. And then like we'll also learn that, you know, the reasons that the reasons that we have Jay-Z on the Judas and the Black Messiah soundtrack are very much related to the reasons that we have Jay-Z on the Great Gatsby soundtrack. And so they're both equally absurd.
Yes.
Well, actually, I could see more of a connection with Great Gatsby than with that story, because Great Gatsby happened at a time where Black music was like coming out, you know, the era of the new Negro. People were stepping out and saying, this is our thing. So I could even see it more the way it was presented in Great Gatsby than in this.
Well, I think they did a better job on that soundtrack to even like speak to that. That soundtrack at least like features remixes that sound like they're of the era. Here it's just like, we're gonna make a rap album that has Jay-Z and Nipsey Hussle from the grave.
Yeah, I just didn't even know who was singing. And I also think it's too bad for them that it was filmed in Cleveland and not in Chicago, because it just, you know, I know the thought was, well, it's the Midwest, but it's just anybody who knows Chicago, it was clearly not Chicago.
Yeah, I want to get way too nitpicky, but it's also like a very weird thing to hear a person who's supposed to be from Peoria talking about coming down here to Chicago. It's just weird to me.
Yep.
That's the Decatur in me. I'm sorry, but you know, like
basic geography.
Ms. French, just a question for you. It says, can you touch on where and when you found out about Fred's assassination?
I was in the Cook County Jail. I had, again, tell me if I'm being too wordy, but there's more of an explanation to this.
Sure.
Fred, as you saw from the movie, they had framed him with this ice cream truck robbery, which was absurd, and he had been locked up. And when you saw him getting out, he was getting out on appeal bond because of the, you know, there was an absurdity of that. So that end of the summer, fall, where he made like his big speeches and stuff, he was out on appeal bond. and he was waiting to hear. And right around November, late October, early November, he received word that his appeal had been denied, and he had been given a date to get by which to get his affairs together and turn himself back in. And so when you saw those scenes in the end, like where the gang members bring him all that cash, it was like everybody saying, man, just go on and leave the country or do this. There were all kinds of things that people were trying to, convince him to do. And, I mean, I can't speak for what he thought, but clearly he didn't do any of those things. And so the Illinois chapter had jurisdiction over the whole Midwest in the party. And Fred knew whatever he ended up doing, he was going to be gone. So he called in all the chapters. So that's like why Mark Clark was in Chicago. People came in from all these different places, Indianapolis, Detroit, Rockford, St. Louis, all these different places that we were over. And he set up, we were having all these massive political education classes, and people were being housed at different places. So those of us who, were hardcore members had to go and stay at places where people were staying because they didn't know their way around Chicago. And, you didn't even have a cell phone that could give you directions. So I was staying in an apartment in the South Shore neighborhood with people who were from out of town. Fred, meanwhile, had gotten to the point where he suspected, I think he actually suspected O'Neill. He knew that something was up and he was not trusting people. So he wasn't staying at his apartment that last week or two. He would just disappear in the evening. And to get in touch with him, a phone tree was established. So if something happened in the evening, the number where I was, people called me, and I had a number to call to say, can you tell Chairman Fred to call me? And I don't even know, I mean, I was the only Lincoln that was in the party. I don't know who that was. I don't know if that was somebody sitting next to him I was speaking to, or if there were 10 people. All I know was that when I called that number, he called back within a few minutes to say what's going on. And for example, you recall that there was a scene where Jake Winters got into the shootout with the police and killed the policeman. I had to tell him that over the phone. And that, in a way, sealed the resolve of folks to really kill Fred, because there was an editorial in the Chicago Tribune saying anyone suspected of being a Panther should be shot on sight. They were just outraged that someone from the party would kill police officers. And Jake had ambushed them. It was not official. Nobody had sent him to do it, but that just sort of drew the lines. So and how you see things in retrospect. In retrospect, O'Neill was getting frantic because he didn't know where Fred was, and in the evenings. And so December 2nd, the police came to where I was staying around the same time in the morning. They came knocking on the door, and they said that it was Western Union. And at that time of morning when they came, it's before anybody is having any consciousness from their sleep. You're in the deep sleep. It's too late for people who were out, hustlers who were out on the street, to even still be out, but before people who get up and catch the early bus to go to work. There's just that gap of time there. So they knocked on the door, and I said, who's there? And they said, Western Union. And I'm like, Western Union, who would be sent, and then I said, oh, just stick it under, it was like, that was a hint that something was crazy, because Western Union didn't just come out. And who would even know that I was at this apartment, because I didn't live at this apartment. And so that was so things unfolded, and a brother who was at that apartment and I clearly were not thinking straight. And we tried going out the back door. We took the guns that were present in the apartment. There were only 2 guns there. And we went out the back door. In Chicago, apartments have interior rear staircases and then you go to outside. So we were in a basement apartment, and when we opened the door to going back in the rear hallway, we could see that there was a ring of police all the way around the building. So we went running up some stairs it ended up very problematic with bullets flying, and we were arrested. Now, they didn't come there because they thought Lynn French was somebody they needed to get rid of. They just, I believe with all my heart, they just came there because they knew I was the person people were calling to get in touch with Fred, and it was Fred they were looking for. So there were 3 of us who got locked up. And so we had just spent I guess that evening, the next evening, there was a rally and they were trying to raise bail money and had a PE class and all that. And that's the evening that Fred was drugged and was too sleepy to go wherever he was going to stay, and ended up staying at his apartment. From what I'm told by people who were there, some of them went back to the apartment to talk before he and Deborah were going to leave to go wherever they were going to stay. And I believe O'Neill, I don't know if anybody knows for sure, but I've been told that O'Neill served Fred some Kool-Aid. Fred didn't drink and didn't smoke dope, so he's not somebody who would just be getting high. And he was served some Kool-Aid, and people think that's where he was drugged. And so he got really sleepy, and they ended up staying there that night. And so by the next morning, which was our first morning actually waking up in the jail, there's another sister who was arrested along with me, and we're sitting there eating our breakfast. And usually the TV is running in the Cook County Jail. They keep the TV going because they want you to just be caught up in soap operas and mindless stuff, right? So the TV just stays on all day long. And the first thing I noticed was, why isn't there a TV? I want to see some news. And usually I was trying to convince the other sisters on the tier, can we just watch the news for a few minutes? But there was no TV. And then the matron came in and said, your lawyer's here to see you. And was one of the lawyers from the People's Law Office. And I could tell he had been crying. And so I knew it was something big. And he'd come to tell us that Fred had been murdered, Fred and Mark. And so that's where I was. For whoever asked that question, where was I when I found out about Fred's murder?
Thank you so much for that. And we'll take a last question because we began late, if you all don't mind. And I think this is from a student. And the question is, does it make a difference to any of you that Fred Hampton is not played by an African-American? Please.
For me, no. I know that's a big debate, in Hollywood, and people are very frustrated about it. But, no, I think Daniel Kaluuya is a fine actor, and so I don't really have a big issue with it. I will say that I think the actors read a little bit older than Fred Hampton and Mark Clark actually were during that time.
Well, when they were actually even writing, they had the commitments from the 2 lead actors at the point that I met them. That was, basically what they said to me was, we're going to get a deal from Warner Brothers and these are who our lead. So for them, that was like making bank, to have that. I agree that he's a good actor. It didn't really bother. What bothered me was that I could tell that he studied Fred's speeches, but he didn't always sound like Fred. But most people who saw the movie didn't know Fred, so I guess that doesn't make any difference. But we're all Africans, so what difference does it make?
Edie, do you have any parting words before I give it to you?
I don't have anything to add to that. I don't have a problem at all. It's like the least of my concerns with regard to film.
All right. Professor McDowell, any final comments?
Oh, just a very minor comment, mainly thanks to you all for coming, for sticking with us through the panel, which has just been absolutely fascinating. I'm going to be sitting with this for the rest of the evening. I'm really grateful to all of you. But for what I can say, which I just decided on the spur, when we organize our international symposia, we have elaborate programs with resources, with further readings, and Currents in Conversation is one of our impromptu programming. It's never organized far in advance, but I've just decided for executive reasons that we are going to attach further resources to our website pertaining to this film. The 10-point plan and various other readings and articles pertaining to the Black Panther Party. So by all means, visit our website again, and within a few days, you'll find additional resources there. And I can also invite you to visit our YouTube page, where you will see other symposia we have organized, where there is a bunch of stuff to read and see and learn. Our purpose in Currents in Conversation is to organize on a dime around an idea, a topic, an artifact, a film that is commanding the attention, or that is commanding the attention of the airways and the print media. And so we thought we should have a Currents in Conversation about this film, about Black organizing, about surveillance, etc. So we're really very glad that you could be here with us, and stay tuned for future events. Be safe, wash your hands, wear your mask. All right.
Thank you for the
Thank you,
invitation.
panelists. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.